Dr. Tsipursky, let's look at giving. You've studied this. What made you want to do that?
Well, what made me want to do that is that folks often give based on stories, based on emotions, and stories move us, and that's what causes us to give. We see a story of an innocent child, and that somebody tells us that story, or a dog that's been starved or something like that, and it moves us to give. But you know what? Stories tell us zero information about how effective any cause is, how effective a nonprofit is. We just don't know from the story about how impactful it is, how much good it makes in the world. And that is very frustrating to me, because then what happens is that the nonprofits that are the best at telling stories are the ones that get the money, as opposed to the most impactful nonprofits, the ones that do the most good in the world. And so people spend their money in a way that really doesn't do justice to the world and doesn't reflect their own goals and values. They essentially waste their money. So it's a very kind of rigged game where nonprofits that are best at marketing are the ones that are getting the money.
Boy,
and that's the problem.
And in a day like today, where marketing can be so important, this is a great thing to look at. So what did you examine in your research?
So in my research and my studies, I examined how we can actually orient toward changing our giving to make our giving truly effective, and orient toward effectiveness instead of stories, instead of being pulled by our emotions. So not simply giving with our heart, but combining our heart with our head to make the wisest decision. And it turns out that the most effective nonprofits are the ones that orient toward cost effectiveness. What does that mean? So it's using the value of the amount of good done per dollar. So how much impact does the nonprofit do per dollar? Not simply looking at how much cost its overhead, not simply looking at how much money it spends in various expenses, not simply looking at the stories that it gives, or simply the data of the amount of stuff, but how much money it takes it to do the good it does in the world. You know, for example, there can be a pet shelter that takes care of 3 animals for $100, another pet shelter that takes care of 10 animals for $100. And that's a big difference. That's a huge difference. But the one that takes care of 3 animals, it might be able to spend the rest of the money that donors give to it in creating better marketing, in creating better messages. And that will get more money. So what we need to do is look at cost effectiveness of the actual amount of good that it does per dollar.
We're talking with Professor Gleb Tsipursky, an assistant professor of history at The Ohio State University, and we're talking about giving. And Professor Tsipursky has outlined we've got to be a little careful in this, because stories make us want to open our wallets and make those donations. So how do we go about using the heart, where the story creates, and the head? Do we ask questions of charities? Would they be able to produce information that would help us to understand how far their dollars go?
Exactly. So what we need to do is ask questions. And I run a nonprofit called Intentional Insights at intentionalinsights.org, where folks can go and learn the kind of questions that they should ask nonprofits in order to give wisely. So asking a nonprofit about their data. How much information can they provide about whatever the person cares about? So let's say you hear a heartwarming story about a child, and you really want to address children's needs this Christmas season. Then you should use that emotion to not immediately give to the nonprofit that you heard the story about. So take your time, see that, I feel an emotional drive to give to children's causes. Look at the best nonprofits that are working within this field. Look at their cost effectiveness. Look at each nonprofit and how much money it spends, what is its budget, and look at the data for how much good it does in the world. Because otherwise, you're wasting your money, essentially. You're not going to buy a car by hearing a commercial about, whatever, Zoom or something like that, or how attractive is the man or the woman standing next to the car, which is essentially the story that commercials create. You're going to be a savvy shopper. You're going to go and you're going to test drive the cars. You're going to look at what you want to buy and why you want to buy it and what takes your dollars the furthest. Now, the problem is that we currently don't do that in our giving. We just give to the nonprofit that makes our heart feel good, but that doesn't carry our money nearly as far as it could if we are a savvy investor, if we are a savvy nonprofit shopper.
Professor Gleb Tsipursky with us, an assistant professor at The Ohio State University in the Department of History. Professor Tsipursky, maybe just one last thing, and that is we always want to help the less fortunate, whether it be the animals in the world, whether it is people who could really use a smile at this time of year. One thing that gets talked about in a lot of municipalities, it's been talked about here, is basic income. And this is something else you've read into. What have you found about basic income?
So that's a fascinating question. Let me share for your listeners what basic income is in case they don't know. So basic income is the idea of providing people, instead of the various social support that we currently provide them with housing and so on, and food through food kitchens, simply providing them with a chunk of change, just money, replacing all of that, for them to support themselves and spend the money on whatever they need. So what the research on basic income shows is that people are quite more capable of knowing what they need than our various government and welfare charity institutions that provide them with these needs. These institutions have a lot of bureaucrats and officials running them, and these officials, they would simply be not necessary if you give people a basic income that provides them with their livelihood. If you give poor people a certain basic income that takes them to the level of reasonable survivability, that they can have a reasonable lifestyle, it's much less expensive than running the network of shelters and soup kitchens and various health programs that are currently running in the country. And they would be able to spend their money much more effectively because they know more about what they need than some bureaucrat up there. So basic income would basically save us a chunk of change and be much more effective for the people who need this money.
Would this not be a concept that works on paper but maybe not in real life because we're counting on people knowing how to effectively spend that money?
So research on basic income shows that people actually spend their money quite effectively. So there's a lot of mistrust when people first hear the concept, and I heard some mistrust around this concept when I first heard about it. Would people spend it on sin goods or luxury goods such as tobacco or alcohol or stuff like that? And people don't. They're not stupid. They're not, they spend their money wisely. They know what they need and they know how they can get it most effectively. So they actually do spend their money quite well. And this has been shown by a number of studies on basic income in European countries, in developing countries, third world countries. Right now, there are some experiments being run in the United States by organizations such as the Y Combinator and others. Canada has some experiments. So it would be a matter of running experiments and seeing how people use the money, but it seems likely that basic income is the best solution to our current situation in the country, and especially because of the future. What will happen in the future will be huge structural unemployment, as we have things like smart cars, where the cars are self-driving, autonomous driving cars. Well, how many people will be displaced by that? There are so many people right now who work in the transportation industry: truckers, bus drivers, taxi drivers, Uber drivers, and so on. Uber already has some self-driving cars. Now, all these people will be displaced and they won't be able to find jobs. There are so many other areas where automation will replace jobs. We just can't. There will be huge structural unemployment, and to help these people provide a basic living without increasing our vast network of welfare systems that are not nearly as efficient as they could be, basic income seems like the best solution.
Two branches of giving, and you've spelled them out incredibly well. Dr. Tsipursky, thank you so much for your time. All the best through the holidays.
Thanks so much, Mike.